Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a strawberry bread, and this is what it looks like. This bread is buttery sweet. It has a soft and moist texture. It's full of juicy, sweet, fresh strawberries and some chopped nuts. This is great bread to make when strawberries are in season, and it freezes really well, so you might want to make a couple extra loaves. So the first thing that you need to do is to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius, and then you will need a loaf pan. This one measures 8.5 by 4.5 by 3 inches deep, which is 21.5 by 11.5 by 7.5 centimeters. Now you can butter the inside of your loaf pan. Today I'm just going to use one of these non-stick vegetable sprays. And just bottom and the sides. And then what I like to do is, to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan, just take a little piece of parchment. I put it in, get a little oil on one side, then flip it over and put it in. I do that so that the parchment paper doesn't stick to the bottom of the bread. So that's that there. So the first thing that you will need to do, we are going to add a half a cup, which is 50 grams of, now you can use either walnuts or pecans. That's usually what I use. But I like to toast the nuts first, because that really brings out their full flavor. So just put your, I'm using pecans, just put your pecans on a baking sheet, put them in the oven for, I'm going to say about 8 minutes. Really, it's until you can start to smell them. If you open up the oven door, you can smell the pecans. And then let them cool. I've already toasted mine. Let them cool, and then, as I've done here, just coarsely chop them. Okay, so now for our batter. This is more like a cake batter. I guess you could call this a strawberry cake. We tend to call things that we make in a loaf pan a bread, but it's more of a cake batter. So if you have a stand mixer like I have here, use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer for this. The first thing you will need is a half a cup, which is 113 grams of butter. I'm using unsalted butter. Have your butter at room temperature. I like unsalted butter, one, because I like the flavor, and two, you know, if you buy salted butter, if you don't know the brand, you don't know how much salt it contains. So I like to control the salt in my recipe, so that's why I'm using unsalted. If you have a favorite brand of salted butter, you can use that. Just leave out the salt in the recipe. So what I'm going to do is just beat this on low speed just until it's nice and soft. Okay, that's good. Whenever you're making any batter, you know, periodically stop, scrape down the sides and bottom of your bowl to make sure everything gets mixed together. Now the next thing we're going to add is 3/4 of a cup, which is 150 grams of granulated white sugar. And then I'm adding 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. The vanilla is for flavoring. If you don't want a vanilla flavor, you could just leave that out. So now what I'm going to do is beat this on medium-high speed. I want to get everything mixed together, plus I want to get some air into the batter. So I'm going to say like a couple minutes. Okay, that's good. So just got everything mixed together. It's light and fluffy. So now we're going to add 3 large eggs. Have your eggs at room temperature, and 3 large eggs out of the shell weighs about 150 grams. I'm going to add 1 egg, beat that in, then the next, and then the next. Just on medium speed. And the next egg. Now we're adding quite a bit of eggs here, 3 eggs. So if you may notice your batter curdles a little. Don't worry about that once we add the flour. And now I'm going to add that last egg. Okay. So as you can see, this is kind of like, this is really a cake batter. So now you're going to need 1.5 cups of fresh strawberries that have been cut into small pieces. So 1.5 cups, it would be about 1/2 pound, 225 grams of fresh strawberries. And what I'm going to do is, so you have your fresh strawberries all cut up. Make sure you wash them, dry them really well so they're not too wet. And then you will need in a separate bowl 2 cups, which is 260 grams of all-purpose flour, plain flour. And what I'm going to do is just take like 1 spoonful and just add that to the fresh strawberries. That's going to help prevent our strawberries. You know, the biggest problem when you use fruit is that it tends to, you know, have you ever had that where you put it in your pan and then when you cut into it, when it's baked, you know, all the fruit's on the bottom. If you cut it small enough and then, you know, make sure your fruit is fairly dry and then toss it with a little bit of flour, that helps prevent the strawberries from kind of sliding through the batter. Not that it tastes any different, it's just, you know, visually. You like your fruit suspended. So that's our strawberries. So to the rest of the flour, I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of baking soda, and then 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram, I'm using a fine kosher salt. You could use a tablespoon salt. And then I'm adding some ground cinnamon. I like the cinnamon with the nuts and the fresh strawberries. Now, if you don't want that flavor, you can just leave it out. But not only does it add flavor, but it really gives the bread a nice golden brown color. You can add anywhere between 1/2 and 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Give it a try. I know it may sound weird, but it makes it look good and it tastes good. So just whisk it. You could sift it. I'm just using a little wire whisk. You can just use a fork to make sure everything is mixed together. Now what we're going to do is add the flour in 2 additions, and I'm going to alternate that with, I have 1/2 cup, which is 120 grams. Now you can use either, I'm using sour cream today, have it at room temperature. You could use a plain yogurt as well. If you want, you know, your bread to be buttery rich, then use the full fat, the whole. You could get away with a reduced fat. I wouldn't use a fat-free. You want some fat. So I'm going to add about 1/2 of my flour mixture here. We're going to beat this in low speed because you don't want the flour to come up in your face. Okay. And sour cream. Beat that in. And I'll just give that a scrape. And then I'll add the rest of the flour. It's almost incorporated, but not quite. So what I'm going to do now is add my pecans. Now I said pecans, walnuts, but you know, if you want to use almonds, if you want to use hazelnuts, you could do that. Or really, if you don't want the nuts, you don't want that crunch and the flavor, you can just leave them out. And I'm going to put in strawberries. You can just fold this in, or make sure you gently mix it with your stand mixer or hand mixer. You don't want to crush your fresh strawberries. Could you use frozen? You could. I wouldn't defrost the frozen berries. I would put them in, like, because if you use frozen fruit, there is a tendency, especially if you defrost them first, to bleed into the batter, and you don't want that. So leave them frozen. The only difference will be that your bread might take a few minutes longer, obviously, because you're using frozen instead of fresh. So I'm just going to beat this very slowly for just a second. Okay, and I'll do the rest by hand. My son and daughter-in-law went out to a U-Pick and picked these strawberries. And they are so good. I haven't done that for years. And I can't believe the taste difference. You know, if you go and buy in the grocery store in those plastic tubs, I mean, even if they're grown nearby, they don't have the flavor of a U-Pick. They've spoiled me now. So good. Okay. Hey, that looks good. So now we are just going to put this right in here. It's a really thick batter. And the good thing about a thick batter, that also helps our berries from not falling. You know, if you are, okay, don't slop like I do. If you're like a thin batter, sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. You can cut the berries into small pieces. You can toss them in flour, and they're still going to sink because the batter just can't hold. But this is thick, so you should be okay. Like I said, this bread freezes wonderfully, so if you have the fresh, make yourself a few extra loaves and freeze them. And sometimes when I'm freezing them, what I do before I freeze them, I slice it. And that way, if I just want to take out a few pieces for myself, I don't have to take out the whole loaf. Okay. Now there. I'll put that behind and see what I'm doing. Because you may notice I have... that up. I have some more fresh strawberries. I'll show you what I'm going to do with them. So I'm using an offset spatula. You could just use the back of a spoon to even this out. It smells wonderful with that ground cinnamon. You can see there's lots of strawberries. Okay. Now you can just put it in the oven like this, but what I'm going to do today, if you happen to have extra strawberries, just take your strawberry and then slice it into, fairly thin slices. And then what you can do is just kind of put them, press down, kind of dresses it up. Okay, and just press them gently into the batter. So there we have it. And then what I do is just put a little bit of sugar on top. That'll help them, prevent them from drying out as they bake. So, as with everything we bake, everyone's oven is a little different. But This will take between 60 and 70 minutes, I would say. Rotate your pan front to back about halfway through baking because your oven tends to have hot spots, so if you rotate it, it gets more an even bake. So it's going to rise. It is going to turn a beautiful golden brown. It might split a bit, and you want to bake it until a toothpick inserted into the center comes out clean. And so I'm going to say 60 to 70 minutes. Okay. So our strawberry bread is done. So put your bread on a wire rack. As you can see, beautiful golden brown color. And as you can see, the strawberries that I put on top did kind of spread out. If you did find that your bread, if you can see it's a beautiful golden brown, that's how I like it. But if you found it was over browning during baking, what you could do is just take a piece of foil and lightly butter it or oil it and put it on top, and that will prevent it from over browning. But I like it this really dark golden brown. So now what I'm going to do is let it cool about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll take it out of the pan. So now to take the bread out of the pan, just take a flat edge. I'm using an offset spatula. You could use a knife. Just run it along the inside just to make sure it's not sticking. Okay, it looks good. And then pan's still a little hot, so just flip it out here. And as you can see, because we oiled the parchment, it just comes right off like that. And then I'm just going to flip it back right side up like so. Just going to let it sit on the wire rack until it cools down to room temperature. And then when we come back, we will try a slice. So our bread is cooled down, so let's cut a slice. Still just a touch warm. Okay, there we have it. Doesn't that look wonderful? As you can see, the strawberries didn't fall to the bottom because one, we coated them with the flour, but two, the batter was thick, so it will hold the strawberries in place. So now this is really good with some butter on it, but I'm just going to eat it plain today. When the bread is freshly baked, the outside crust is quite crisp, but if you cover and store it, that will soften. A lot of flavor to this bread. I like the bit of cinnamon flavor, and then all those wonderful, juicy, sweet strawberries, the chopped pecans, really flavorful. You can cover and store this for a few days, like I said. A lot of times what I do if I want to freeze it, I slice it into individual slices, and then you can put a little parchment paper between them. So that way, if you just want one slice, you just take it out of the freezer, let it defrost, rather than having to take out the whole loaf. So you must try this. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyBaking.com.